Single parents, what's the most mind-blowing thing your partner has done for your child? My boyfriend Brian never wanted kids in the first place, so I always presumed that me having an autistic 13-year-old son would be a deal breaker. When Brian first met Josh, things were awkward, especially because Brian was the type of guy who barely said 10 words all day. He was calm, quiet, not exactly touchy-feely. I worried that Josh, who struggled socially, would feel even more isolated with Brian around. Then one night, everything came crashing down. Josh came home from school, slammed his bedroom door, and started tearing down his posters. He stuffed his telescope under the bed and shouted through tears, "I'm sick of being the weird kid. I hate space and I hate myself for liking it." I stood frozen, unsure what to do, but Brian just stood there silently, his jaw tight. After that night, I noticed Brian staying up late. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and see the faint glow of his laptop from the hallway. When I asked what he was doing, he'd shrug it off, muttering something about work. I figured he was stressed or had trouble sleeping, but he never let on. Josh became quieter at home too. He avoided all things space-related. It hurt to see him suppress something he loved just to feel normal. But Brian seemed to notice something I didn't. He started disappearing a few evenings each week, always returning late, looking drained but somehow determined. Josh's 13th birthday rolled around, and we planned a quiet dinner at home. Josh wasn't excited. He barely touched his cake, staring blankly at his plate. After dinner, Brian cleared his throat. "Josh, I have something for you outside." Josh hesitated but eventually followed him out to the backyard. I stayed back, letting them have a moment. I watched from the patio as Brian pulled a tarp off something large, revealing a beautiful telescope. It looked sophisticated and meticulously built. Josh stiffened, shaking his head. "Why'd you get this? I told you I'm done with this stuff. It just makes me weird." Brian looked nervous for the first time since I'd known him, shifting his weight and rubbing his neck. Then quietly, he started talking about the stars above them. He pointed out constellations, identified planets, and explained the phases of the moon like he'd known them his whole life. Josh stood there stunned, staring at Brian like he was meeting him for the first time. "How do you know all this?" Josh whispered. Brian took a deep breath. "I've been studying astronomy every night for months now. Tutorials, documentaries, even went to some nerdy club meetings. I didn't want to say anything until I really understood it. I know I'm not your dad, and maybe I never thought I'd be anyone's dad. But when I saw you give up something you love because of what other people said, it killed me. You shouldn't have to change who you are to fit in." Josh stood completely still, tears filling his eyes. Then he took a step forward and hugged Brian tightly, openly crying into his shoulder. I'd never seen either of them like that. Brian held Josh close, looking relieved, maybe even proud. After that night, things changed. Brian wasn't suddenly talkative or overly emotional, but he softened noticeably. He smiled more, and he and Josh spent nights in the yard together, quietly pointing out stars and talking softly about things I barely understood. Josh went back to school with his head higher, openly carrying astronomy books again, confident that he wasn't alone anymore. Now, months later, their telescope nights are a regular thing. Sometimes I watch from inside, amazed at how Brian, who'd once seemed so unreachable, had broken down his own walls just to show Josh he wasn't alone. It's strange how someone who never planned on being a dad ended up becoming the best one Josh could have asked for.